Good afternoon, everyone. This is John, your commissioner, coming to you from Illinois, and I just wanted to say congratulations to Chris and Jared on making the championship game for NFL for our fantasy football league. Let's get into it today. It's going to be a very interesting matchup. I'm glad to see that we all made it this far. I know we survived a bunch of owner changes. We dealt with league changes, going from 12 to 10 teams, and it's been an interesting year. It's been a fun one, but it's all coming down to this. It comes down to this final week, week 16, and after that, we can kind of just sit back and watch our teams. I know the Bears just clinched up the NFC North this last week over the damn Packers, so I'm so excited about that. I'm glad that they're going to not only go to the postseason or go to the playoffs, but also they destroyed the goddamn Packers after years and years and years of being under their shadow. It is a goddamn Bears time to reign the NFC North. We've got obviously Saints and Rams are still above them. We've got in the AFC obviously Chiefs, Chargers, Patriots all lead in a very tight race for the number 1 and 2 seeds there. It's going to be fun. So why don't we kind of get into it? But before we go into the matchup today, we will discuss the draft order, since that did get brought up, I think, about a week ago. Obviously, draft order is pretty much finalized at this point with the way that the matchups went. I'm going to pull it up here in a minute, but I do want to thank you guys for a wonderful season. It was interesting to say the least. Lots of movement, lots of activity, a lot of surprises. Obviously, I mean, this championship week is going to be without James Conner, without Odell Beckham Jr., with almost without Melvin Gordon. I mean, there's a lot of big players this year that just aren't going to have any of these big names. Yeah, we still have some in a lot of leagues, and especially in our league, there are a lot of the bigger players out there. But injuries have really killed teams this year. It was brutal for a while there. I mean, between me for Le'Veon Bell with his contract situation, obviously James Conner being an issue for whether he was going to have a starting job or not if Le'Veon Bell came back, and now he's hurt. Melvin Gordon obviously being out week 15 hurt Jared. It didn't affect him all that much, it looked like, but it was a really rough year, and we survived it. It's going to be fun to go through this matchup here. I don't know if I would have believed that it was going to be Jared and Chris, obviously, if you would have told me 5 weeks ago. It's a bigger deal, or not a bigger deal, but just a surprise. And it kind of makes it fun because you never know what's going to happen. So why don't we get into that? I will go through the draft order here, like I said. So obviously, the Saints do have the number 1 overall pick for next year's rookie draft. They will have the number 1 overall pick, and the Patriots come in at second. The tiebreaker there was the fact that the Patriots and Saints did play each other. Obviously, we all play each other at least once, and it kind of helps with tiebreakers here. So Saints lost to the Patriots by about 10 points earlier in the year. So Saints got that number 1 pick. Patriots will have the second. Raiders will have the third. Dolphins ended up with the 4th, and the Raiders ended up with 3rd, as they were what they would have been the Jaguars. So they were behind the previous Jacksonville, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Dolphins ended up as the 7th seed outside of the playoffs over the Raiders. So Raiders, previously Jaguars, they end up with the number 3 pick for the rookie draft next year. Dolphins get the 4th. And the way that we have it set up, this way we kind of focus on the championship game, and this way you don't have somebody winning a week or people trying to lose weeks in the playoffs. What we will do every year in every league is, here's the best way to explain it, is so with how Keith and I lost in this last round to move to the championship game, Keith had the better week than I did last week, so I will get the higher pick. And the reason that I feel like this is probably best is it prevents people from tanking that final matchup and getting a better pick out of it. I know that all of us are very active, but you never know how people feel after a matchup, and it kind of lets us focus more on the championship, on the people who got there, and have a bit more fun with that. So obviously, Panthers had the worst week when they lost in the what it would be wild card round for us. Vikings had the better week by about, I think, 2 points. So Vikings will get the number 6 pick. I ended up losing to Jared in that sense, or Keith in that sense, as I only put up 141. He had 190 in the semifinals. So he gets the number 8 pick while I get the number 7. And obviously the 9th and 10th picks overall will be decided this week. Obviously, Falcons and Cowboys both want to win the championship at this point. I mean, there's no reason to try and throw a week for one different seeded pick. They are obviously trying to compete. They want to win. Chris is definitely looking for it after being out of the MLB playoffs after not making it. And obviously, Jared wants it even more because of the fact that he lost in the MLB championship to Keith, who is now on the outside looking in. And it's going to be different. So we'll see what happens this week. It's currently a 40-point projection win for the Cowboys. So why don't we get into that? Obviously, predictions and projections, they don't mean shit. We never know what's going to happen. There's so many different variables. I mean, who saw the Carolina Panthers almost beating the Saints last week 12-9 as the Saints took away that victory? I expected probably 27-21. So especially this late in the season, everybody's banged up. Everybody's dealing with different situations. Coaches are starting to break out their playbooks, and it's going to make a difference in this championship. Chris was obviously the number 4 seed who went 7-6 on the regular season. The Cowboys were the number 3 seed who went 10-3 in the regular season, and they are vying for the championship this week. It's going to be fun. So let's dig into it. So we've got 2 great quarterbacks, both veterans, no youth at all in this matchup here. You've got Matt Ryan, who is taking on the Carolina Panthers, and that will be against Ben Roethlisberger, who draws the New Orleans Saints in New Orleans. Both quarterbacks are on the road. It sucks for both of them. Obviously, both play much better at home than they do on the road. So with Matt Ryan, obviously we just saw Carolina shut down the New Orleans Saints offense. They went after their number 1 receiver of Michael Thomas, and they focused on him on third downs, especially with all of the injuries to the New Orleans Saints wide receivers. Atlanta clearly has more depth at wide receiver than New Orleans does at this point. I still worry because Matt Ryan has been super inconsistent on the year. If you look at his last 4 weeks, he would be anywhere from 25 points to 7 points. He's really fluctuating. His worst week was against Baltimore, where he only put up 7.64 points. We may see something like that this week. Obviously, divisional matchup is always tougher because that team knows you very well. They've played against you many a times. And Matt Ryan taking on the Carolina Panthers, I wish I would have actually done this before. Obviously, it's a tough matchup with Carolina and Ben Roethlisberger. I prefer him this week taking on the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, it's in New Orleans. New Orleans is a much better offensive team, which means Ben should be airing it out. So I'm going to take Ben in this matchup over Matt Ryan. He's been a lot more consistent. Obviously, the injury to Juju Smith-Schuster earlier this week kind of hurts Ben's ceiling. He doesn't have the same ceiling that Ryan does any given week this year, at least. But Ben has a safer floor because of Antonio Brown, and James Washington may get some work. But New Orleans has been susceptible through the air. I see Ben putting up probably 20 points. He's going to have to throw this week. So give me Ben taking on the New Orleans Saints. And at the running back position, I don't know how Chris has gotten this far without a damn running RB1 at all. He has 0 RB1s on the year. He's got the combination of Kenyon Drake, Nyheim Hines, and Elijah McGuire. None of these are considered bell cow backs. It's different for sure for a championship team to be here without one running back, a top tier guy. But he will face 3 of them this week in Nick Chubb, Dalvin Cook, and Joe Mixon. So we'll go through each of these like last week, one by one, kind of break down the matchups and see what happens. So obviously, let's start. Kenyon Drake taking on Nick Chubb at the RB1 position. Kenyon Drake's so hard to figure out what he's going to do week to week. He's a boomer bust guy. He's the type that, okay, he could give you 24 points or he could give you 4. He has hit double digits 3 out of the last 4 weeks, and that was against New England, Buffalo, and Indianapolis. Obviously, he was shut down against Minnesota. He only had 4 total touches, and that's the problem with Kenyon Drake. He could have one run for 80 yards and a touchdown, but you're relying on that, and that's brutal, especially taking on a Jacksonville defense that is questionable. I mean, we don't know which defense is going to show up. Obviously, it's in Miami, which helps, but Kalen Ballage of the Miami Dolphins actually looked really good last week. Adam Gase doesn't seem to commit to Kenyon Drake, so I'm worried about him. Obviously, Nick Chubb has been done very, very well. He was shut down for the most part last week against a very good Denver Broncos defense, only 10 points. He had 20 carries, 100 yards, no receptions, no touchdowns. So not the week that Jared would have liked out of Nick Chubb, but still a very solid week. But over the last 30 days, Nick Chubb is averaging 18 points a game. It makes Kenyon Drake versus Chubb easy. Give me Nick Chubb. He's obviously got the workload. He's got the stability, higher floor. I like the ceiling even better because he is showing some talent out of the backfield. He's had at least 3 receptions 4 out of the last 5 weeks. He didn't have any last week, but that was a very low-scoring affair between the Broncos and the Browns. And I expect him to see a lot of work this week. The Cincinnati Bengals, who he's taking on, look bad. So give me Nick Chubb this week. Next, we've got Nyheim Hines taking on the New York Giants. I want to call them the New England Giants. Versus Dalvin Cook, who draws the Detroit Lions. I don't think there's any competition this week. We saw what Dalvin Cook did here. He's looked really good the last few weeks, especially with that change at offensive coordinator. I thought he was going to get some more touches, and he has. Over the last 3 weeks, Dalvin Cook went from 9 carries to 13 carries to 19 carries. Obviously, he saw his receptions go down, which hurts in his overall scoring. But he looked great last week, 7 yards per carry against a Miami defense that's obviously susceptible to the run. And Harrison Snacks will be out for the Detroit Lions, it looks like. Snacks Harrison will be out, and it's going to affect that run game because before they got him in the trade earlier this year, the Detroit Lions were giving up 5.5 yards per carry. And with him being out, I expect them to go back to that. They don't have a run stuffer, and it's going to be tough for especially a star like Dalvin Cook, who's starting to turn on the burners and look healthy again after his ACL tear in week 1 of 2017. He looks back to the guy that everyone expected. Nyheim Hines, he's a gadget player. Obviously, against the New York Giants, I don't expect the game script to be there for him. He needs a high-scoring affair, almost like the Theo Riddick of old, where if the Lions were trailing, Theo Riddick was going to get a ton of work. He was going to be involved in the game a lot. And Nyheim Hines, he had a decent week last week with, I believe, I'm pulling it up here, with 10.4 points against Dallas. They were ahead, so that was more than I thought he would get. But I think his ceiling this week is probably around that 10-point mark again, which isn't bad, but that's not going to earn him an RB1 or RB2 status. So Hines is questionable to me. Obviously, give me Dalvin Cook against a bad Lions defense. And next, we have Elijah McGuire, which was actually a sub-in for the Atlanta Falcons. So they benched Doug Martin to put in Elijah McGuire, who they picked up off the waiver wire. Obviously, it's very good with Isaiah Crowell being down and the rest of that backfield being questionable, being injured and banged up. McGuire looks to be the bell cow back, which is great. It's against a Green Bay defense this week that didn't look great against Jordan Howard. Obviously, Elijah McGuire isn't on the same status as Howard. He's still a very solid running back. And Elijah McGuire will take on Joe Mixon, who draws the Cleveland Browns, who absolutely shut down Phillip Lindsay last week, and that was in Denver. So Obviously, it's not the greatest matchup for Joe Mixon. It's going to be tough for him to get going, but he's been the bell cow. I mean, he may have a slow start to the game, but because of the fact that you have just Jeff Driscoll, you don't have AJ Green, you don't have Tyler Boyd this week. Mixon is the only guy on that offense that I would trust right now. And let's see, pulling up fantasy points against the Browns. Where are they at? The Browns actually are giving up 21.5 fantasy points to running backs, and that's PPR running backs. So I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Mixon ended up putting up 20, 21 points because he's the only focal point on that offense. Driscoll is a terrible quarterback. He has no receivers. John Ross is obviously just a straight line speed guy, similar to Tyreek Hill, but Jeff Driscoll has no chemistry with him. Ross hasn't shown an ability, like true breakaway ability like Tyreek Hill does. So Mixon's going to get the work. He's going to get, he's a pass catching back. He can run between the tackles, outside the tackles. He's got a little bit of everything in his arsenal. Elijah McGuire has the workload. I don't know how high of a ceiling he has, but obviously give me Joe Mixon in this matchup. And the advantage overall in running backs goes to the Dallas Cowboys. I don't think anyone saw any other prediction than this coming in, just due to the fact that I could see between Chubb, Cook, and Mixon 60 carries total, whereas Drake, Hines, and McGuire might combine for possibly 30. And that's, I mean, obviously, yeah, you want the efficiency of 7 yards per carry, 6 yards per carry, and lots of fantasy points at once, but you also need that floor when it comes to running backs. Especially in a championship week, you don't want somebody giving you 2 points like Kenyon Drake may do. So let's move on to the wideout position. And this is a star-studded, loaded field. Both teams have some very good receivers. Obviously, Dallas is dealing with some injuries this year and underperformances. A lot of it is injuries, though. And I'm excited to get through this because you've got some big names. Obviously, Atlanta Falcons are trotting out Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, Calvin Ridley as a rookie, and Juju Smith-Schuster, who had a down week last week, and he may have a down week this week, but we'll get to him when we get to him. And that set of wide receivers will take on DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones, Isaiah McKenzie, who was a big surprise for me when I looked at the matchup this morning, and John Ross. So obviously we'll start with the wide receiver ones in Mike Evans taking on DeAndre Hopkins. Evans draws the Dallas Cowboys while DeAndre Hopkins draws the Philadelphia Eagles. Now on Evans, it's pretty interesting because he played a very, very good Baltimore defense. He put up almost 20 fantasy points last week. I think he was around 16 or 17. And that was a lot more than I thought he would do. I mean, he's at 74 receptions on the year, 1,328 yards and 5 touchdowns. He's averaging 16 points a game, which is great. And he put up 16 points against Baltimore, which is a very, very tough defense. Now, I don't know what to think of him taking on the Dallas Cowboys because the Cowboys have been a really schizophrenic defense. They've shut down the New Orleans Saints earlier this year by absolutely just stuffing the middle of the offensive line and not giving Breeze the ability to step up into the pocket and deliver those hard throws like we know he can. But then they go to Indianapolis and take on the Colts, and they get shut out 23-0, and they couldn't find an answer to stop Marlon Mack. So the Buccaneers don't have the run offense that Marlon Mack obviously provided. So Mike Evans should get plenty of work. And especially with Jameis Winston, who's going to throw for 300 yards and a score at least, but may turn over the ball 2 or 3 times as well. I kind of have my question marks about Evans. He could gladly put up a great fantasy week of 16, 17 points. But when you have DeAndre Hopkins taking on Philly, who obviously, yeah, they shut down the Los Angeles Rams last week and looked great on defense. I think a lot of that was the Eagles being able to look at the Bears tape against the Rams and show them how they shut them down, shut down the run, and make Jared Goff have to throw, and it worked. But that's not going to work against Watson. Obviously, Lamar Miller looks like he may be out. So DeAndre Hopkins, it'll be him again. You have Alfred Blue in the backfield. You don't really have anyone else. So Hopkins is going to get 17, 18 targets this game. And after putting up 39 points, how can you doubt the man? I mean, it's DeAndre Hopkins, and I would not be surprised if he put up another 25, 30-point week this week, taking on a bad Philadelphia secondary that is going to probably not be able to take away the ball, but that offense may turn the ball over, especially taking on the Houston Texans defense. So give me DeAndre Hopkins. He's the wide receiver 2 on the week for me. He's obviously a wide receiver 1 play, but I like the ceiling for Hopkins more than I do Mike Evans. Now we've got Tyreek Hill versus Julio Jones, both great speedsters, obviously different body builds. Tyreek Hill, smaller, faster guy. Julio Jones is the freak athlete with great speed, but also is 6'3", and we've seen stiff arms out of him that are amazing. Now, I'm sure this would be hard for Chris to deal with if he loses to his own Julio Jones, which is never fun. A guy on your team, you want your team to perform. Obviously, it's against him, so it makes it hard. Tyreek Hill takes on Seattle in Seattle this week, while Julio Jones takes on, obviously, Carolina at Carolina. It's a brutal matchup for both, and a lot of that is due to the location. Obviously, at Carolina, Carolina is a better team, and Tyreek Hill taking on Seattle at Seattle is rough. Seattle defense is not the Legion of Boom we are used to or from years past, but they've still been very effective especially at home, pulling up fantasy points against. The Seahawks are only allowing 23.3 points to fantasy wide receivers. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some Chris Conley, if we saw Travis Kelce, if we saw a lot of Damian and Darrell Williams this week. Just like last week against a good Charger secondary, the Chiefs were looking to go anywhere else but Hill, especially with that heel injury. That's going to make a difference. Hill is still able to run, but it's going to affect everything else that goes on. He doesn't have the same ability to cut, to drive as fast as he did. And Julio taking on Carolina, he's done it before. He's destroyed them. The Carolina secondary isn't the best. They have a lot of issues, and I was surprised when they were able to shut down the Saints offense from the previous week. But pulling up Julio Jones and against Carolina Panthers, earlier this year, he only put up 11.4 points when they faced off in week 2. Obviously, not what you want out of Julio Jones. You expect 16, 17, almost 20 points every week, especially in a PPR league like we are. But going back to 2017 as well, he only put up 13 against Carolina in the final week of the season. And then against them in about midway through the year, 17.8 points. I think he's got a great floor. Obviously, the ceiling is kind of topped off with it being a divisional matchup. It makes it a lot harder for both offense starting to get going because you know what to expect. Because of Tyreek's heel injury, I'm going to take Julio Jones in this matchup. I think Julio knows more about the Carolina defense than Andy Reid does about the Seattle Seahawks, and especially that injury to Tyreek Hill's heel will make a difference. So give me Julio Jones. Moving on to the wide receiver 3 position, we've got the rookie Calvin Ridley taking on Isaiah McKenzie. I had to fix this slide before I jumped on. I'm glad I looked, because the Dallas Cowboys decided to go with more of a floor play than a ceiling play in this one with Isaiah McKenzie, who's actually looked very good over the last few weeks, taking on Juju Smith-Schuster. So Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley is going to be a part of that Carolina matchup I just talked about, so I'll dig more into Isaiah McKenzie here. McKenzie, if you don't know who he is, he has been in the NFL for 2 years, really hasn't done anything up until this year. He was limited earlier this week with an ankle injury, but he was full go on Thursday and Friday, so he looks ready to go for this week. And over the last 2 weeks, he's combined 28 points. So it's a good floor play, especially with Kelvin Benjamin not being there, Zay Jones not being a big part of it. But you've got Isaiah McKenzie and was it Robert Foster, I think, are the 2 wide receivers that Josh Allen has actually clicked with. And obviously, I don't like what Isaiah McKenzie is going to do because he is taking on the New England Patriots. That's always worrisome because it's at New England. Obviously, we haven't seen a quarterback under 25 years old go into New England and win since Colin Kaepernick, and that was, 5-6 years ago at this point. So I worry about Josh Allen and his receivers. It's a decent play because they are going to have to keep up with New England. So it's a decent play. It's a floor play. I think Calvin Ridley has the better ceiling this week, even though I have Calvin under a wide receiver 3. I think all of it's going to run through Julio and Austin Hooper. Calvin Ridley, I would probably take him over this matchup just because, New England isn't the same defense or offense that we're used to, but they know how to scheme and take away guys, whoever they want. So give me Calvin Ridley. Obviously, Juju Smith-Schuster is for Pittsburgh. He is taking on the New Orleans Saints, like we talked about with the quarterbacks, and John Ross taking on the Cleveland Browns. It doesn't look like Denzel Ward will be out there. Even if he is, I don't expect Ross to be much of a factor in this game. Like I talked about with running backs, it's going to be all through Joe Mixon, maybe a little bit of CJ Uzama, but the ball is going to be on the ground a lot. It's going to be a ground and pound game for the Bengals. They just want to get in, get out of Cleveland, and be done. While Juju is going to take on New Orleans, obviously he should not draw the top corner in Marshawn Lattimore, but that groin injury that he suffered on Thursday at practice is going to limit him, and that's going to limit his ceiling. He is questionable for the game. He's probably going to be a game-time decision, and it's a 4:25 game. So that's a brutal spot for Chris to be in at this point because there's not a lot of games that you're going to be able to find someone to play after Juju Smith-Schuster. Say he's declared out. Here are the games that are after the 4:05, and you have Steelers Saints at 3:25. Obviously, Chiefs and Seahawks are the Sunday night game, and the Monday night game is Broncos Raiders. Obviously, there's no one really available for Broncos. No one you really want to play from the Raiders. Chiefs and Seahawks, everyone's owned. Even Rams Cardinals, that one's a little bit before, so you're not going to have that option of somebody to turn to. So if Juju doesn't go, that's going to be a hard hit for the Falcons, as they're probably taking, I think at this point with the injury to his groin, they could probably expect maybe 10 points. We saw his ceiling kind of limited last week. He's currently projected to put up 18, but I think at this point, all you can really expect is maybe 10 or 11 points. That groin is really going to limit his ceiling because of his ability to move. Had it happened on Tuesday, he'd have some time to heal. I would feel better about it. But even with that, I think I would still take Juju Smith-Schuster over John Ross. John Ross went back to 1 catch, 9 yards. Really didn't do anything this last week, and I think it's going to be about the same stat line for him this week, unfortunately. And because if he doesn't get a touchdown, he's a bust. But he has a decent ceiling. He needs that touchdown to be worth it, though, for this week. So overall, even though I have 2-2, give me the Atlanta Falcons offense or the wide receivers for it. Just because Isaiah McKenzie and John Ross are interesting plays, but we don't know what's going to happen with them. And especially if Calvin Ridley is playing out of the slot or playing on the outside, he may see some great looks against a Carolina defense that is susceptible to the pass. The problem with John Ross is he could bust out. He really could drop a goose egg on Jared in this last week, so I wonder about that. But overall, it was almost a wash for me. But just because of the depth at wide receiver that Chris has, I'm going to give him the very slight advantage at wide receiver. So moving on to tight ends, this is actually a pretty interesting play. Jalen Samuels, it looks like James Conner is going to be out. So obviously Jalen Samuels having the tight end designation is great, which it ends up hurting him in the long run, though, because he will not have this next year. It plays out well for the championship game, though, because all Jared can look at is this year. Can't look forward to next year just yet. So you have Jared Cook of the Atlanta Falcons and Oakland Raiders taking on Denver, and it's in Oakland, which helps. taking on Jalen Samuels at New Orleans. A lot of big pieces between these two teams with the New Orleans and Pittsburgh game. This one is tough. Obviously, if James Conner's out, Jalen Samuels will be the #1 running back. And it's fortunate for Dallas that he does have the tight end designation. So it means, obviously, his tight end, quote unquote, will get 15, 16 touches, maybe a couple of receptions, who knows. And Denver's not a really good defense. I can't trust anyone in that Oakland offense. Even Jared Cook this last week had a really down week. And it being a Monday night game, if Atlanta's trailing, they're going to rely all on Jared Cook. And the highest he's put up, I think, is 23 points in a week. But, I mean, he's put up 23, 11, 12. He's right around that 11 or 12-point area. And if he wasn't able to put up points against Cincinnati, which was a bad defense all year. And now they get to take on the Denver Broncos, which actually, now that I think about it, they are division mates. So let me see what his previous matchup was. But I worry about it just because, obviously, Oakland's been bad. He's the only piece worth owning. But the last time that Denver and Oakland played, that was in week 2. He put up 8.9 points. I'd expect about the same. Jalen Samuels will be the #1 running back for the Steelers this week. So give me Jalen Samuels, and advantage goes to Dallas. Now, in our last position grouping here, we have the flex position. We have the flex spot with Doug Baldwin, Demaryius Thomas, and Mike Williams taking on Chris Carson, Melvin Gordon, Derrick Henry. And we'll see how this plays out, but obviously receivers versus running backs. Running backs have the higher floor. Wide receivers sometimes have the higher ceiling because of, with us being a PPR league, obviously more receptions, more points, higher ceiling like that. But obviously we've got two teammates taking on each other in Doug Baldwin versus Chris Carson. Currently, Baldwin is projected to put up 12 points, while Chris Carson puts up 15. They both take on Kansas City, and a lot of this is going to be game script because Doug Baldwin finally looked healthy. He looked like his old self last week because he put up 23.7, 4 receptions, 77 yards, 2 touchdowns. And it's going to be a high-scoring affair, or at least I expect the Chiefs to be able to put up 27, 30 points in Seattle, which means that Seattle is going to have to move the ball, whether it's on the ground or through the air. It's obviously going to have to move. They're going to have to score. Now, Seattle has been one of the most heavy Seattle's been one of the most run-heavy offenses. There we go. Run-heavy offenses this year, and Chris Carson, as long as he's been healthy, he's looked great out there. And obviously, if Chris Carson's getting a lot of work, that means Baldwin isn't. So, especially on 4 receptions, it's tough. Obviously, Kansas City doesn't have the best defense. They don't have the best corners anymore. Kendall Fuller being hurt obviously hurts the defense. I expect Chris Carson to be similar to Justin Jackson last week. The Chiefs allowed a rookie Justin Jackson to put up 17 points. I think Chris Carson could easily do that. Baldwin worries me because, I mean, Tyler Lockett has been the deep threat all year. He was the main receiver for Seattle all year. And it didn't really seem to shift back to Doug Baldwin last week as he only had the 4 catches. So give me Chris Carson in this matchup. I think the Seattle Seahawks are going to try and play a time of possession game against the Kansas City Chiefs in Seattle. They want to hold the ball, slow that offense down, get Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and the rest of those pieces off of rhythm, try and slow them down, keep the game to like a 21-17 or 24-21 type game, if not lower. So give me Chris Carson with all of his touches that'll be available for him. Now we've got Demaryius Thomas taking on Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon looks like he's going to be ready to go for this week. He doesn't have the injury designation to his name going into Saturday night's game. Obviously, this is going to be a huge boost for Dallas going into this game, knowing that they have one of their RB1s back as well. It's not the best matchup going against Baltimore. It's never easy to do. And, I mean, who knows what's going to happen because a lot of this will be a ground and pound game. Obviously, Lamar Jackson's going to run. they're going to use Gus Edwards and Kenneth Dixon out of the backfield for Baltimore, while the Chargers are going to try and get Melvin Gordon going. While he's been out the last couple of weeks, they want to see him perform. They want to get him ready for the playoffs. And this is a must-win game for the Chargers. The problem is that Baltimore only allows 13.3 fantasy points to running backs. I think Melvin Gordon is probably around there this week. He could sit at 20 carries for 60 yards, and that touchdown is going to be the difference maker here, though. Obviously, taking on Baltimore is never fun, but I still think he has a better ceiling and floor than Demaryius Thomas does. Demaryius Thomas is a part of that Houston Texans, Philadelphia Eagles game, and Demaryius really hasn't done a whole lot since he got to Houston. He's obviously looked better every week. Facing Cleveland 3 weeks ago, he put up 6 points, 8 points against Indy in this last week. He put up almost 12 points. I still think his ceiling is probably capped at right around that double-digit mark of 10 or 11 points, which isn't what Atlanta needs. Atlanta needs that kind of boom this week. And if Demaryius Thomas isn't able to provide it, it's going to hurt. Even though Melvin Gordon has a very, very tough matchup, I would still take him in this matchup due to the fact that obviously touches are there. He's one of the best running backs in the league. And if Demaryius has such a boom or such a bust potential this week, even though Philly is a bad defense, I would still take Melvin Gordon. Now, Mike Williams taking on Derrick Henry. Mike Williams is a question mark for this week because Keenan Allen should be back for that Chargers offense, which means that the ball is going to go to Keenan Allen. They want to keep him going. Obviously, like I talked about, it's a bad matchup for the Chargers offense taking on Baltimore in Baltimore. Actually, no, it's in LA, which helps. But Baltimore is going to try and shut down that offense, and I don't like Mike Williams in that matchup. Obviously, he put up 36 points this last week, and that was against a Kansas City Chiefs defense that was willing to let points be scored. 2 touchdowns, a 2-point conversion for him, allowed him the monster fantasy day that he had, and obviously knocking me off, which was tough. But Mike Williams, if Keenan Allen's back, is going to lose a lot of those looks. He's going to lose a lot of those touches against a really, really good Baltimore defense. Derrick Henry, obviously, I mean, Dallas has to ride the hot hand at this point, because Derrick Henry looked like a guy that wasn't even worth owning 4 weeks ago. But Mike Vrabel has gotten that offense going, and they aren't even the Tennessee Titans anymore. They're the Tennessee Derrick Henrys. And everything's run through Derrick Henry. The last 2 weeks combined, he's had 50 rushing attempts, 17 against Jacksonville and 33 against the Giants. Obviously, he's going to get his touches. He's going to be a high-volume running back. He's not a part of the passing game, which kind of hurts, but the Titans aren't taking on a great offense in Washington, and Washington's run defense has really fallen apart over the last few weeks, as they were one of the stingier matchups on the year after 10 weeks, but the last few, they haven't been great, because right now they rank at, let's see, where did they go? See, the Redskins are, Washington, that's right. There they are. They are allowing 18 fantasy points to running backs. Earlier in the season, they were sitting around that 12, 13, 14 mark. And with the way that Derrick Henry's played, he may put up another 30-point game. I mean, their Washington Redskins are on their third-string quarterback. They're without most of their running backs, and their receivers are terrible. I expect the Titans to be up often and early, and that means it's a game script game for Derrick Henry to get the ball 25, 30 times. Give me Derrick Henry. I think that's an obvious matchup there that should go in favor of the running back, especially with Mike Williams taking on Baltimore while Derrick Henry draws the lowly Redskins this week. So give me Dallas in a sweep of the flex position. Obviously, coming down to the prediction, the only advantage that the Falcons really looked like they had was in the wide receiver category, and that's tough. I mean, it's never fun to see a lopsided projection in the championship week. We all want it to be exciting, and I think it may end up being closer just due to some of the matchups. A lot of these obviously affect each other. Obviously, with Chris having Matt Ryan and Calvin Ridley, if Ryan's performing well, that means that Julio Jones is probably performing well, but it could be to Ridley. And if Ryan isn't getting the passes to Julio, or that Falcons offense stutters like they've been known to do this year, we could see a lower overall score. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger and Juju and Jalen Samuels all being tied together. We've got a lot of cross-team matchups here, and it's going to be pretty interesting. It's going to be fun. I don't think there's any others that really affect it here. Obviously, Gordon and Mike Williams, like I just talked about, Chris Carson and Doug Baldwin, a lot of it more in the flex position. But other than that, it's going to come down to Monday night. If it's close Monday night, Atlanta has a chance because of Jared Cook. But we will see I predict that we'll see the Cowboys take a quick lead in this matchup with Melvin Gordon and Mike Williams playing against each other, obviously, in this matchup on Saturday today. Dallas also has Justin Tucker going tonight, which will be interesting, while the rest of the games are pretty much all Sunday. So I think Dallas gets out to an early lead. I don't see Mike Williams doing a whole lot tonight. But overall, it's not going to matter. Give me Dallas in the final week of the season. Jared will be crowned the champion. I have a hard time believing that the running backs will be able to pick it up enough for Atlanta this week for Chris. It's the volume. It's the boomer bust quality. And over the season, I did have this discussion with Chris earlier this week. Over the season, Dallas averaged 169 points week in and week out. That was their average on the season, while Atlanta sat at, I think, 146 for their weekly score. I just don't have a lot of confidence. I mean, obviously, a lot of things could change. Injuries can make a difference. I'm hoping it's close. I'm hoping we see 20 points, like a 20-point difference on Monday night, and we can see, hopefully draw some sweat out of Jared going into the final day. But I'm going to take Dallas in this matchup, and I think Dallas is going to be the champion in this one. It's been a long season. 16 weeks of grinding tough matchups, of finding who to play, and the fact that a guy like Derrick Henry or Mike Williams or Chris Carson, Jalen Samuels, a lot of these players aren't guys you would have predicted in the first week or even halfway through the season that they'd be carrying someone to a championship. Obviously, James Conner being out's huge, and I think it's going to be fun. I realize I'm rambling, so I'm going to tie it up. I will say good luck to both of you. Chris, Jared, hell of a season, you guys, to stick with it, especially with Chris selling off some of his pieces early and then buying back in, realizing he had a shot just to make the playoffs, and he did it. I'll give him that. He made his chance and took opportunity of it, and here he is in the championship game. Obviously, Jared was trailing Keith the whole time in that division, and he made himself known against Keith this last week as he took him down by over 40 points. It's going to be interesting. It's intriguing to see the number 1 and number 2 seeds knocked out. It makes it more fun when you get the rest of the league involved and staying at it, because especially in the playoffs, you never know. It's 1 week. We have things happen. Good luck to both of you. I will see you guys in the Slack. I will see you in the NHL preview later this week. And I will tell you now that I will not do NBA reviews this week. I kind of want to let it breathe. I will do NHL reviews, and then starting up the week after, I will do NBA reviews as well. That'll probably be a Monday night review for NBA. NHL reviews will be on Tuesday. So that's how the schedule is going to look. If you guys want to, like I said, if you guys want to co-host, let me know. I'm always willing to jump in, or let you guys jump in and let you guys lead it. I can always make the slides and make the show while you guys host it, and I can just kind of be a part of it, especially for NBA. That's not my wheelhouse as much. Obviously, I'm learning. I know some about the league, obviously the players, but fantasy has never been my forte there, I guess, for basketball at least. So if you guys want to do it, let me know. I mean, I've got the login for the YouTube. You guys can join us. So I'm excited to see what happens. NHL is getting actually really close. I'm Right now, I'm leading against Keith by 50 points. I did not expect that going into this week. So we'll see what happens there. Actually, I'm going to do a quick little review of not review, but kind of show the scores right now. This one's going to be really close. I mean, I feel like a lot of our teams are fairly even. We've got the Carolina Hurricanes, who have had another bye week, obviously 60-point lead over the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Wild trail the Golden Knights only by about 27 points, and we've got 2 days left to go. That's going to be a close matchup. The Ducks are somehow trailing the Predators 168 to 191. And then the LA Kings look like they're going to get their fourth win of the season as they are beating the New York Rangers 166 to 109. And my Blackhawks are holding strong right now against the Avalanche. It's still a scary matchup, but 50-point lead. And I'm not going to say I'm confident because I think the last time that happened was against the Ducks or the Wild or somebody like that, and I ended up losing on that last day. So anything can happen. There's a lot going on, but the fact that the Ducks are only at 168 is a huge surprise this week. It would really bring the league back to everything if the Avalanche and Ducks somehow drop this week, especially to the Predators and to me. That's going to make the playoff race really interesting getting into it. So good luck, everyone there, and good luck, Chris. Good luck, Jared. I'm excited to see how your guys' matchup goes tonight. And since you guys only have the one matchup, we'll see. Have a good rest of your night, and keep those lineups set, guys.